Hello and welcome everybody back to another edition of the Big Guy Fantasy Sports Fantasy Football Consistency Show. We are here. Week one is over, and wow, and not in a good way. I was reminding somebody, and Ron, as always, sitting here on my right is Ron Rigney from Big Guy Fantasy Sports. But Ron, I swear, and I look it up if I have to prove it, but just 2 or 3 years ago, I swear, week one of 2 or 3 years ago, the NFL set a record for the most points scored total in the first week. Am I remembering this right?
You definitely are because I remember talking about it on here. I
Yeah.
remember we had a discussion about it because we were talking about how I think that our prop bets hit that week. I think we hit we did really well that week, and I think we were looking at that as one of the reasons as to why.
Yeah, and maybe it was week two, week three. Maybe it wasn't week one, but I swear,
It
maybe it
was
was like
early.
the combination
It
of
was
the
early.
first 3 weeks or something. I just remember just points flying everywhere. And this year, holy cow, um, I have never seen in any 1 week. Now, week one is always a little bit awkward on our consistency model because it is taking the top X amount of players at each position and dividing that into fantasy points per game, and then that gives us our clutch factor. Now, for most of you that have followed this, but if you don't, I'll kind of clue you in. The normal factors on average, the last 3, 4, 5, 10 years have been about 19 or 20 points in that range for quarterbacks. PPR format, running backs, wide receivers, about 11 points, 10 to 11 points, and tight ends about 8 to 9. That's always been about that range. Hasn't fluctuated much. This week, the clutch factors for quarterbacks is 14.71. So there are 20 quarterbacks that qualify this week. And the reason I'm bringing this up, and we'll talk about the other positions when we get there, where how low they are, is that as this adjusts, those guys like Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen, who had 15 or 16 points in their games this week, will lose that clutch game when that factor goes up. So don't think because they earned it this week that they get to keep it. It is still based on the average for the year. So people will gain and lose that are close to those numbers on a weekly basis. So for those of you who are like excited that, oh, Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen earned a clutch game this week, great. But it probably won't be there next week if they probably will be 1 for 2 next week if they both do well because the factor will go back up probably over 15 or 16. They'll lose that one and gain the new one for this week. But Ron, your thoughts? I know you watched a lot of games on Sunday. I was watching a lot of Red Zone. You were too. I mean, it was sloppy, and not just sloppy like the Browns Bengals where it was bad weather. Okay, I'll give Burrow and those guys credit for that one. But Jalen Hurts looked bad. Josh Allen looks bad. Is it really just the fact that if we just assume that from now on, because 3 years ago they didn't have, they played more in preseason and now nobody plays? Is this just the first 2 or 3 weeks is not going to be the preseason for the NFL and we're just going to have to deal with it? That's what it looks like.
I mean, it does look like that, and you wonder that too, taking a full game away from that. And a lot of guys, like you said, did not play one snap, and it was kind of controversial. I watched a little bit of the Jets Hard Knocks, and it was kind of controversial. Saleh playing the starters in the third game. A lot of people said, "Well, why are you going to do that?" Well, this is kind of evidence as to why you might have wanted to do that, and maybe getting rid of that fourth kind of tune-up game really wasn't the right answer. And you were talking about points flying around. I think this last week there was a lot more expletives from fantasy owners flying around. I've chosen tonight my daughter's room. I thought we could use some pastels, and she's got the happy sign over here.
She's
so I thought
happy.
that we can start anew in week 2. It's only 1 week, so we can get the ship right here. But I think we're going to touch on some guys too that didn't hit that clutch threshold across every position, that things are looking a little more promising in week 2.
Absolutely. So if we looked at the usual of 19 to 20 fantasy points as our clutch factor, there would have been about 11 quarterbacks that qualified. Now, the interesting part is some of those are players that we did not expect to be up there. And I'm looking at you, Mac Jones, Jordan Love, Anthony Richardson, Brock Purdy, Sam Howell. Even though Brock Purdy, as we saw late last year, seems to get that 20 to 22 points a week. Not going to set the world on fire, but he's going to get you enough to earn you a clutch game. I think that looks good for him. Certainly looked good in that game against what I thought was a good Steelers defense, but may or may not be. But there was a lot of guys, as we talked about, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts. Patrick Mahomes was basically the only one of the big four that everybody drafted in rounds 1, 2, 3 that actually earned a legit clutch game, I'll call it. And he didn't even look that great against Detroit, but he had 22.8, which had actually placed him 7th. Talk about that top 11. We're gonna each pick a player to kind of say whether they think they're going to continue this consistency or not. But talk about that, and then talk about the player that you are looking at in this group or below this group that you think might either get back up or might drop back down.
Well, and you mentioned too, and you watched Red Zone and you watched a lot of games this weekend, and I had a lot of games to choose from here, and it just seemed like there was like we get back to them playing one less preseason game. It was just a lot. It was teams were really super ready to play, or they just weren't there yet. And I think you can kind of classify everybody in one or the other. Like I was telling you off air, how super excited I was that we had down here the Niners and the Steelers, and I do a pick 'em league each week, a little money on the line, and I picked the Steelers. I thought there's no way, we hear all these great things in the preseason and Kenny Pickett and
Brock Purdy can't be healthy.
Yeah, he's not good. He had Tommy John surgery essentially coming back from that, at the UCL, and they're traveling cross country. I think they're going to be good, but I just don't know about this first week. And boy, was that the wrong assessment, man. And watching Pittsburgh, Kenny Pickett throwing to routes that were not there, throwing to clearly a guy in a white Niners jersey. So just a lot of sloppy.
And he played a lot of preseason. That was the surprising thing for me with Pickett was he played in a lot of games, because I remember John Hansen and those guys talking about him on a weekly basis about how good he looked out there with the first team offense and first 2 drives of every game resulted in touchdowns, blah, blah, blah. And then, now granted, San Francisco was a good defense. We got to give them some credit. But guess what? They're playing the Browns this coming Monday night. Browns look pretty good on defense too against Joe Burrow and company. It was raining, but hey, they did the job.
Yeah, and I drafted Kenny Pickett a couple places as my backup, and of course, one of those places is in the Kings Classic where I was starting none other than Aaron Rodgers this week. Ooh. So that prompted me to kind of look at the quarterback market, and I saw that matchup coming up against Cleveland, and they did look pretty stout. Granted, we had some weather conditions there, but who knows? It's just the year that the Brownies get it right. I don't know, but they do have some solid names. I play in a couple IDP leagues, and my IDP guys that are on the Browns got a couple shares of a couple different guys there, went off too. So they were all swarming all over, making tackles, sacks, you name it. So guy I want to go with this week, a guy that people were a little higher on in the preseason than I was. We love to have, especially if you have that league where you have 4-point passing touchdowns, you love to get those rushing touchdowns from your QB whenever you can for that 6 points. This is a guy, like I said, a lot of people are a little higher on than myself. I wanted to see a little bit more. Super exciting guy last year, not so much in week 1, and that's Justin Fields of Chicago. We saw what he did in another case of, because I watched the second half of that game, just a case of not ready to play. I think DJ Moore had 2 catches for essentially no yards. My man Cole Kmet had a couple catches here and there. The rushing was okay from Justin Fields, but for what you probably paid for him as far as draft capital, you definitely did not get that return on your investment that you were looking for. And so I feel like they're headed to they're going to head to Tampa. Tampa's home opener. Tampa allowed a few more pass yards last week than they would have liked to Kirk Cousins. Now, I understand that half of that was to the best receiver on the planet, Justin Jefferson. I understand also we don't have a receiver on that level, but DJ Moore, Darrell Mooney looked pretty solid last week. He was the one Chicago Bears receiver, if you did own one, that actually did something for you. But DJ Moore is way too good to get held to what he got held to last week. I don't feel like this Bucs defense packs the punch it used to. They've lost a few guys. And I don't know necessarily if I trust that the rushing stats are going to be that great, because they do still have some solid guys up front in that front 7. I think the passing numbers are going to be a little bit better for the passing game of the Bears. I'm not expecting a 300-yard game here, but I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that Justin Fields can't go for 225, 250, and maybe a score or two. I think it's a pretty safe bet that we see DJ Moore go off a little bit as well. I'm not expecting astronomical Justin Jefferson numbers, but he's way too good to not get in the end zone and maybe give you, let's say, 7 for 70 yards and a score.
No, that's a good point, and I feel like Fields certainly in this coming week certainly has a better matchup, and it'll be warmer and hopefully dry, and so I see a lot of good things. But I have to ask you this, and I'm going to go a little bit off record or off pace of what we would normally go. I want to talk about the Chicago coaching staff. The Bears coaching staff with Matt Nagy was terrible. We hated him. He kept messing with who was running the ball, who were their wide receivers. He just never seemed to have any real consistency in their model and in their thing. So they bring in this, Matt Eberflus, is that how I pronounce his name?
Yeah.
They brought him in last year, 2022. Now this is the second year, and it's almost like this guy's the same exact coach. Like, they're not throwing the ball to DJ Moore. I don't know why. Why did you for the last 2 years be all about Khalil Herbert being the man behind Montgomery? And he showed that he's the man behind Montgomery, and they get rid of Montgomery. And as soon as this guy, Khalil Herbert, becomes the new, should be number one running back, now they're mixing in Roschon Johnson and all these other people. Do they just not understand how to use talent? Is it coaching? It just blows my mind, because I was so in on Khalil Herbert. He's proven his worth. I have him in a lot of leagues. And yet here they are at the end of that game. Now it was a blowout by then, and maybe they just like, look, we'll just keep Herbert on the bench and we'll give this Johnson kid a chance. And maybe that was all about. But they also gave Deontay Foreman just as many carries and touches as well. And I'm like, just blows my mind what they're doing. And is this just Matt Nagy 2.0?
Well, and you remember Matt Eberflus coming over as being the Colts defensive coordinator, so I don't know if that has something to do with it as well, that they brought in a defensive-minded guy. It seems like all the guys they bring in are defensive-minded, and, of course, the one time they try with Matt Nagy, it does not quite work out, which, by the way, don't forget Matt Nagy is back as the offensive coordinator of the Kansas City Chiefs, and they lost, by the way, so I don't know if there's a connection there as well.
Might be,
Could be. So, just looking at that, looking at, hold on, I'm cutting out here a little bit. Okay, there we go. Oh, hold on. Okay, all right, we're good. Okay, so the one thing too I want to say about that Bears defense, or that Bears offense too, is I watched the second half of that game. Roschon Johnson looked awesome. And he was the backup behind Bijan Robinson at Texas. Obviously, he's not going to get a lot of carries there. You're going to see him mixed in a little bit more. So I have a feeling it's going to get a little bit more frustrating for Khalil Herbert. And I think Roschon Johnson jumps Deontay Foreman. He didn't touch the ball a lot, but he had a nice touchdown run, had a couple of runs, had one where he just flat out planted the defensive back. It's beautiful to see. So that's going to be a guy that's going to get mixed in a little bit more. But I'm with you on this. And it's got to be something that, we obviously don't see it. But, yeah, why would you not try to get DJ Moore involved? Why are you not trying to throw to Darnell Mooney down there? Legit number one, probably the first one you've had there in a very long time that's still in his prime, and I don't know. I don't know why you don't get those guys more involved. I don't have a good answer for you.
No, that's fine. I'm just throwing it out there. All right, so my guy's Justin Herbert. He has been all preseason. Drafted him in just about every league I could, pretty much. And he had a very nice week. Not a great week. 23.2 clutch game, regardless of the clutch factor. 5th overall. And I just think from what I saw in the games, now granted, it helps when you're playing a Miami team that scored, at will, and you're just going back and forth, and, the final score is 100-99, which is pretty much how that game went. But it's just nice to see Herbert. I think the frustrating thing was seeing Mike Williams get hurt again. But, if they can get Quentin Johnson in the fold there, certainly Keenan Allen was his consistent self as well. Hopefully he stays healthy the whole season. But it's kind of disappointing. But I really like Herbert. This week now they're going to not San Francisco, to Tennessee. Tennessee, not a very good pass defense, more of a better run. So I think they might throw the ball a little bit even more, especially with probably Austin Eckler not playing this week. Joshua Kelly looked really good, so I'm sure he'll get the ball quite a bit. But it was great to see Justin Herbert, and definitely keep rolling with him. All right, let's go to the running back position. Ron, as we look at this, as I mentioned before, the clutch factor, normally around 10 to 11 points, 9.07, just a little bit over 9. So a lot of guys qualified for a clutch game this week. In fact, I think we had about, 28 or so. But there was a lot of good scoring by, if we went down to about 11 points, there was almost exactly 24 running backs, which is the cutoff we always kind of estimate anyway for that. So definitely, from that perspective, did a good job. But I think it was just after that, there was just no running backs did anything other than those top 24. But Ron, what are your thoughts on the running back situation this week? And who is your guy that had maybe a down week or an up week and you think might be flip-flopping the other way?
A guy that I think is going to give you a little bit more than what he gave you last week is Jamal Williams. Got 18 carries last week, 45 yards, didn't reach the end zone. And it's one of those things where it was a grinded out game against Tennessee, kind of like what you talked about with Herbert facing them this week. Colby and I went with Derek Carr in our DFS lineup, and that ended up paying off fairly well, giving you a nice cheap option there. But I feel like Jamal Williams is going to get it going this week. The matchup's a little more favorable. I lost where he's playing this week. Oh,
at Carolina.
Thank you. I knew it was a little bit more favorable. So they're going to want to pound the ball with him. Like we looked at, the receivers looked really good last week. They're going to get locked down a little bit more. I think Chris Olave and Mike Thomas, who it's good to see Mike Thomas doing some things, had a couple big catches in that game. I think they're going to get it going a little bit, but I think Jamal Williams is where you really see it get going. We still don't have any Alvin Kamara. And they did not bring Jamal Williams in to not give him the football. You saw he's coming off that season with those 17 touchdowns. Got close to one in this game, too, towards the end of the game there. So I think he gets going a little bit. I think that 18 to 20 carries a game is going to be standard. And I feel like if he had been gaining a little bit more than about 3 yards a clip, 3.3 yards a clip, you would have seen him have about 25 carries in a game like that. So I think they're going to be able to give it him. He's not going to catch a ton, but I think he's going to get it going. I don't think it'd be too offbeat to see at least about 80 yards and a score out of him this week.
Yeah, that's the other thing, too. Is Jamal Williams was all about the goal line, which he didn't get a chance to get to.
Right.
In that very field goal heavy game. But like you said, if you can get down to the end zone, he can get in there. My guy's Tony Pollard, again, 5th in total points last week, or in points last week. Of course, he had a great game, but of course, everybody did against the Giants because they forgot to show up. So I kind of look at that game and go, okay, Pollard looked good. Yeah, he had the touchdowns. But Giants had packed it in. I still think he's a good running back. I think he's a great running back to start every week, no question about it. However, guess who he runs into this week? The New York Football Jets. And therefore, as you may have seen on Monday night, that's a tough defense, running or passing. Quentin Williams was just blowing up the middle. James Cook had a few decent runs, but he wasn't getting anywhere. So I think Tony Pollard and the Cowboys may have a rude awakening this week when the Jets come into town this week because they're coming off a high. Yeah, Zach Wilson is Zach Wilson, but that defense is for real. There's very few spots in that defense that are weak. It's going to be a tough road to hoe. I don't know. I mean, Pollard may get close, but he might miss a quality game this week. I'm still starting him. Obviously, I got him in a few leagues, but I'm not counting on 22 points this week in order in the top 5. That's for sure. So, Ron, your thoughts on that? You seeing that the same way as well, or?
Yeah, it's definitely going to be tough. And like I said, I think a lot of my love for the Jets comes from watching them on Hard Knocks. But you look at, that defense, those front seven are just, like you said, that front line is just stout. Quentin Williams, watching him on there and just watching, a couple of episodes were devoted to him and just watching the moves that he uses and just how he's just a ginormous human being that is just an amazing athlete. It's fun to see. But I don't think that that's too far off at all. It's definitely not going to be a 40-point game for the Cowboys like it was last week. It's going to be a little bit tougher sledding. And I just might be talking about one of the other weapons in that game, maybe not being as valuable as you might think he might be.
Gotcha. And that's a great segue. So let's go to the wide receiver position. And as I said before, the clutch factor is certainly down. Let's take a look at the wide receiver spot. Of course, we're looking at the consistency report of Big Guy Fantasy Sports, 9.4. Like I said, usually running backs and wide receivers PPR are pretty close. So a little bit higher than the running backs, but still definitely very low. Is it usually around 11? But Ron, Tyreek Hill went off. Guy, I'm going to talk about went off, but I'll let you, there was certainly some unique ones. Jacoby Myers being number 3, Kendrick Bourne being number 5, may have not been drafted by most people. Jacoby Myers probably was. Puka Nacua, which is, of course, everybody's fan fest for this week. Rashid Shaheed would be another one that obviously was blowing up on in all of the waiver wires. But your thoughts on the wide receivers this week? You were missing some big names up there, Jamar Chase's, AJ Brown's. Some of those guys didn't have the great weeks that we expected them to have. And so your thoughts on those, and who are you picking again for your wide receiver to look at this week?
I heard our guy on the way home, Mr. Jeff Manns, talking about the wide receivers this week, and he brought up an interesting stat that last year was the first year ever that the consensus wide receiver top 4 ADPs off the board were in the top 4 in scoring since 1990. So that's happened one time, and that was last year. So it didn't happen this week. I know you're a Jamar Chase owner like myself in a couple places.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, that did not go well there. Hoping for some better weather wherever. I can't remember where Cincy's playing this week, but anything is going to be better.
Cincy is in Baltimore. Actually, they're home against Baltimore. So
okay, so
it's Ohio. So yeah, the weather could be garbage at any time. You never know.
Yeah. So, but I'm hoping that also I don't attribute all that Joe Burrow performance to the weather either. I'm hoping they get a little bit more acclimated with each other. Here again, losing that last preseason game. But, some guys that I didn't think that were going to came through. Garrett Wilson came through with a decent game, even though we know what happened to our guy Aaron Rodgers. Stephon Diggs in a tough matchup, put up a solid game. But, yeah, Tyreek Hill, and that's here again another game. If you're able to watch some of that game, boy, that was a fun game to watch. That Miami offense just carve up. Now, I know the Chargers defense is not going to be defense of the year anytime soon. But, man, just carving them up and just kind of taking chunks that they wanted, and it was impressive. So the guy I'm going with this week, you mentioned the New York Football Jets, and you mentioned they were going against the Dallas Cowboys, who are riding high off that big Monday night 40-0 shellacking of the Giants. But I don't know that CeeDee Lamb is going to have all that great of a week. I feel like this Jets team is going to be motivated to play well in honor of their fallen teammate, the guy that they pinned all their hopes on, Mr. Aaron Rodgers. Not that they're not running short on motivation anyway. That's another thing I loved about that. Was Jeff Ulbrich, the defensive coordinator, just one of those Dan Campbell-like dudes that you want to run through a wall for. So I don't think they struggle there anyway, but I think they got a little added chip on their shoulder. So CeeDee Lamb, last week, 4 for 77, kind of like you were talking about, Bob. The Cowboys didn't need to throw, so why would they throw? But he did catch all 4 targets, which is encouraging. Nothing against CeeDee Lamb. I think it's just going to be tough skating for CeeDee Lamb this week. Probably matched up most of the week against Sauce Gardner, but the rest of that secondary and the rest of that defense is nothing to sneeze at either.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, another guy I think that you and I talked about off air before we came on that we were both extremely happy about is Calvin Ridley. You and I talked all summer about how, he was going as a wide receiver 3 in many of our drafts. I did a, FSGA draft, and I drafted Ridley as my 3rd receiver after getting AJ Brown and Deebo Samuel and him. And the interesting thing is I was the 2nd highest scoring team this week in the FSGA, and guess who I played? Yep, the number 1 guy. So I scored 132 points. I think the next closest was like 15 behind me, but the guy ahead of me scored 143 because guess what? He had Tyreek Hill.
Tyreek Hill, huh? Imagine that.
Yeah, shocking. So, but anyway, but I was still excited that, that team, I'm still feeling confident about that team getting to the playoffs. So that's all I care about, trying to win that title and get to be in the elite championship competition in that FSGA. But my guy, I talked about him not all preseason. Basically, anytime after August 3rd, when I saw John Lynch at Hall of Fame weekend, and John and I exchanged pleasantries, and I said, "All right, John, you know how this is going to work. I got to ask you about your team for my fantasy purposes, right?" And I said, "Tell me about him." I said, "How's Brock Purdy look?" He said, "He looks good. He's ready to go. He'll be ready for season. Don't worry about him." He said Christian McCaffrey's a stud. I think, okay, thanks. That's obvious. But he said, he goes, the guy that's really surprising all of us this year is Brandon Ayuk. And I said, really? I said, because a couple of years ago when I drove you, I said, you were way down on this kid. You didn't even know if he was going to be stick around. He goes, no, he's really turned it around. He really looks great this year. He's motivated. He's focused. He goes, definitely keep an eye on him. And Of course, by then I'd done 80% of my drafts.
Yeah.
And I didn't get a chance to get him in either Kings Classic, which was disappointing. But I also wasn't going to go draft that high, right? I was going to like grab him in the second round. I thought, well, I'll just get him as my wide receiver 3, but just never got to him. But he goes off, 2 touchdowns, second in total points, 32.9, which is a huge week. We'll see if he continues that. Not that they're playing a tough team. We're playing against the Rams. Rams defense isn't that great. I mean, they did do well against Seattle, a lot better than many thought they would. But I don't, they don't have the team that they used to. Their defense isn't as strong as they used to. But it seems like San Francisco does struggle every time they go to LA. So, again, I'm going to just tell people, hey, lower expectations. If you have Ayuk, you're not getting 32 points, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's in that 15 to 20 range and earning you a legit clutch game this week. So definitely love him. If you didn't get him, I get it. But maybe if you can, probably not going to be able to trade for him right now because everybody's going to be super high on him. But maybe if he has a couple down weeks, maybe you can swoop in and grab him. But John Lynch was all about him. So, all right, let's head to our favorite position of all, the tight ends, which were quite interesting when you really think about this week. So 7.22, again, about 2 points below our usual clutch factor, maybe even a little bit higher than some of the other ones. But I think the interesting thing was what happened in the tight end position this past week. No Travis Kelce, no Mark Andrews. Hawkinson did okay. Dallas Goedert, my guy, worthless, 0.0. And so, yeah, I mean, when you look at, first off, if you only look at the wide receiver, the tight ends over 9 points, there were only 7. And only Hawkinson is probably somebody, Hawkinson and Ingram is probably the only 2 honest to goodness starters on anybody's fantasy team for that week, unless you're in a deep league. Because Hunter Henry, Hayden Hurst, Donald Parham, Cole Kmet maybe is a starter. Blake Bell, those are your 7, and only 2 of them may have been drafted. Welcome to the tight ends, kids. It is just, and it doesn't get any better after that. Sam Laporta, rookie. Harrison Bryant, backup tight end for the Browns. Adam Trotman, backup tight end for Denver. Logan Thomas, who everybody forgot about and thought he died. Zach Ertz, thought he died. Luke Musgrave, rookie. I mean, Tyler Higbee, which I thought had a terrible game for what he should have done, had 7.9 points. It was 14.
Yeah, he didn't do it.
Yeah, so he didn't have as good a game as we thought he would with, but all of a sudden they found wide receivers in LA. So what do we know? So, Ron, your thoughts on the tight end position and where do we go from here? Do we just keep throwing darts and just, close our eyes and just pick a tight end? And, I mean, I wish I was in a league that I could do that. Look, I'm not going to draft a tight end. Just give me I'll just take whoever's on the waiver wire that week in best ball, like best ball waiver wire, like whoever's the best guy that was on the waiver wire that week, I'll take. I probably will outscore most teams tight end on a weekly basis, probably 80% of the time.
Tight end position doing tight end position things like we talk about every year. And we always think it can never get any worse. And then here we are. And then, by the way, you didn't have Travis Kelce, who was your first round pick. Pat Freiermuth got nicked up a little bit. It's a guy that I have in a lot of leagues, caught a touchdown, but he's questionable heading into the week. I was talking to you off air about, my wife's doing a fantasy league and Freiermuth is her tight end. He plays Monday night this week. So then now if he becomes a game time decision, then you got to do all that. And it's already a weak position anyway. So, I added Noah Fant and he got me 4.5 points. Yeah. And didn't expect much more than that. I was crossing my fingers for a touchdown, but you just got to
pick up Harrison Bryant.
Yeah. I mean, and Harrison Bryant's a guy that I've liked in the past. He didn't, he's blocked by David Njoku. We'll see. I don't know. Allegedly, but caught the touchdown. And I'm watching those touchdowns. I'm watching that Tampa touchdown to Blake Bell. And I'm like, Kate Otten's right over there, man. He's a fantasy guy. We need those. Yeah, brutal stuff. So the guy that I'm going with this week, the offense, it looked okay. One of our favorite tight end targets on this show that looked okay. and that's Evan Ingram. And they have the Kansas City Chiefs, one of the highest Vegas totals this week. It's one of the few that both teams are over 50 points. Of course, it was against my Colts last week. I listened to the game, didn't get to watch it here, but listened to the great radio team they have there in Indy of Doug Overton, and I think it's Ken Dilger is the sideline reporter, and I can't remember who they got in the booth. Rick Venturi's in the booth, but it's a solid team. They called the game, listened to it, hated to hear my Colts lose, but Jacksonville was rolling. And the thing is, they got 31 points, didn't really look that great on offense. I think Trevor Lawrence ended up throwing for 237, had 2 scores, but also had the 1 pick. We talked about our boy Calvin Ridley. Evan Ingram, 5 for 49, caught all 5 targets, so we can't fault him for that. And had a decent game, but I think there's potential for more, and there's going to have to be more from him because I feel like if Travis Kelce does play, it's going to up it a little bit. Going to be obviously a few more points scored. They're going to have to answer back, but just that Kansas City defense, not too worried about them defending the tight end, especially against a guy like Evan Ingram that gives you nightmare matchups against those nickel backs that are in there trying to cover him, a guy that can run decent routes, and a guy that's a threat in the end zone.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's like you said, when you hear 5 for 49, you're like, I guess that's okay for a tight end. He was 5th in tight ends at 5 for 49.
Yeah, so that would have been what
the tight end position was.
That would have been what, 9.5 points, almost 10 points.
Yeah, 9.9.
Yeah,
which again would put him in a real legit, like you said, 8 to 9 points. He would earn a legit clutch game. But the fact that that's 5th overall at 5 for 49 is just like, what? Okay. Now, granted, no Kelce, no Andrews, But let's talk about Mr. Blutarski, 0.0 Dallas Goedert. Dude. And I'm not talking about Dallas Goedert. I'm just talking about the Philadelphia Eagles and especially Jalen Hurts. What are you doing? Are you really not looking to this guy at all in a game that you were struggling to win? Come on, man. But guess what? They get to play the Minnesota Vikings at home in Philadelphia on national TV. So I'm expecting a big turnaround. He'll get back in the clutch game. Don't sweat it. But yeah, it was a rough one when I kept, checking the game. And they did see a lot of highlights because there wasn't a lot of highlights in that game on the red zone. But every time I never saw Goddard catch a pass. And I was like, when's Goddard going to? And then I looked at my phone and I'm like, he hasn't caught a single ball. Oh my gosh. But there's a lot of those. I mean, we had T. Higgins, at wide receiver. We had quite a few 0.0s, which was not a lot of fun. But I'm expecting a big comeback this week. Minnesota's kind of middle of the pack with giving up fantasy points to tight end. But, again, 5 for 49. Come on, Dallas. Be there. I'd be happy with that at this point.
Yeah.
Just to get back in that clutch game kind of scenario. So, all right, Ron. Well, thanks so much for being a part of this. If you want to just tell people where they can find you, talk about all the cool things happening at Big Guy Fantasy Sports, and then I'll take it out from there.
Yeah, I told you last week we have all kinds of new friends joining us, putting out all kinds of content. Check it out. You can't miss it. It's out there. It's everywhere. We got podcasts, we got articles, we've got consistency, we've got DFS, we've got prop bets, you name it at bigguyfantasysports.com. On the X, on the Twitter machine, whatever it's called now, at Ron Rigney, real easy to find. Catch the consistently cashing, like I mentioned, myself and Colby Conway giving you that cash lineup, which probably would have done a little more for you this week because we had some pretty heavy hitters in that lineup and did pretty well. So off to a nice start week 1. Last thing I want to add in, I'm going to start doing this every week. I don't know if you guys can see this well, but I'm going to start giving you the random football card of the week. So, because Bob knows I'm a collector of things, nice. And I had to go with 2, not only Colts, but 2 of the fantasy GOATs and Marvin Harrison and my favorite player of all time, Mr. Peyton Manning, the Sheriff. Nice little E-Tops action here from 2005 that I wanted to share with you. So there you go.
That's
still
great.
Factory sealed, by the way. Straight
Ooh,
from the
very
factory.
nice.
Yes, sir.
Very nice. All right. As always, you can follow me on Bob_Lung on Twitter at Big Guy FS. It's out there. Follow it. My boy Run Boy Robbie's all over it. Been tweeting a lot of stuff out of it right now. Check that out. And of course, don't forget to follow the Prop It Like It's Hot. We are back. Me and Colby went 4-2 this week. And the funny thing was, there was the 2 ones we thought were the no-brainers and the easy locks. We lost both of them. The other 4 we didn't.
And if that doesn't encapsulate the whole week, I don't know what does.
Yeah, exactly. That does. Yeah. Yeah. It was like Geno Smith over 1.5 touchdowns against the Rams. Come on. Should have been easy. Anyway, but as Ron said, consistently cashing. I took first place in a 100-person thing. Now, it was only for $1. And I only won $14 because they paid out more. But hey, 14-1 return. Can't beat that. And I think I put in a $3, big game, more of a tournament game. And I think I won another $14 in that one. Placed like 1,000s out of, 50,000. But hey, $29 for a $4 investment. I'll take that every week, folks. So Ron, great job, you and Colby, with that one this week. So everybody keep up with Big Guy Fantasy Sports. Don't forget to be a subscriber. It's only $20 for the season, folks. And you could have won your money back just this past week. So make sure you keep following that. Become a subscriber. Get all these great podcasts and articles as well. So for Ron Rigney, I'm Bob Lung. Everybody have a great week. Take care. God bless. We'll see you next week.